Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive.
Mm.
We're going to be exploring the life of Samuel Holberry.
Okay.
He was a key figure in the Chartist movement
Right.
in 19th century Britain.
Mm.
And, if you're anything like me, your knowledge of 19th century British history might be a little rusty.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So let's set the stage a bit. Imagine Britain in the early 1800s. The Industrial Revolution is really booming.
Right.
Cities are exploding with growth. But there's this kind of dark side to it.
Yeah.
Poverty, inequality, and a working class just struggling to make ends meet. Almost no political power to speak of.
Yeah, that's precisely the backdrop against which the Chartist movement emerges. It was a time of just really profound social and economic upheaval.
Right.
You had this incredible technological advancement happening alongside this massive societal imbalance.
So tell me more about the Chartists.
Okay.
What were they all about?
Well, at the heart of the Chartist movement was a demand for political reform, for a system that truly represented the people. Their goals were outlined in this document called the People's Charter. They wanted things like universal male suffrage, secret ballots, annual parliamentary elections, and even payment for members of parliament.
Wow, those are some pretty radical ideas for their time.
Yeah.
Especially that idea of paying members of parliament.
Yeah.
That's a concept that's still debated in some countries today.
Absolutely. Those demands were seen as incredibly radical, even dangerous by the ruling class.
I can only imagine. So where does Samuel Holberry fit into all of this?
Well, Holberry's story is a really powerful example of the courage and conviction that fueled this Chartist movement.
Okay.
He was born in 1814 and actually started out in the British Army.
Oh, okay.
Left in 1835 and moved to Sheffield, where he became active in the Chartist cause.
Okay.
He got married in 1838 to a woman named Mary Cooper. And then 1840, things took a dramatic turn.
Okay, so here's where I'm picturing like the late night candlelit meetings, the secret handshakes, maybe even some coded messages. What happened in 1840?
You're not far off.
Okay.
Inspired by a previous Chartist uprising in Newport in 1839, Holberry and his fellow Chartists in Sheffield decided to plan their own uprising.
Wow.
They started organizing a militia, gathering arms, making plans to seize key locations in Sheffield, mirroring what had been attempted in Newport.
Wow. That's serious commitment.
Yes.
They were willing to risk everything.
Absolutely. Remember, this is a time when speaking out against the government could land you in serious trouble.
Right.
But the authorities got wind of the plot before it could unfold.
Okay, so did someone betray them?
Yeah.
Was there like a mole within the Chartist ranks or?
That's one of the lingering mysteries surrounding this event. Some historical accounts suggest there might have been a traitor within the Chartist group, while others point to just really effective intelligence gathering by the government.
Right.
But whatever the case, the planned uprising was thwarted before it could even begin.
Wow.
Yeah.
What happened to Holberry and his group? Were they arrested?
Yes, both Samuel Holberry and his wife Mary were arrested.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah.
Facing arrest.
Right.
Did he try to deny any involvement?
Not at all. During his trial, Holberry openly admitted his intentions and declared that he was willing to die for the charter.
Wow.
This act of defiance really underscores, I think, the depth of his belief in the Chartist cause.
Right.
He knew the risks.
Yeah.
And yet he stood firm in his convictions.
So what happened after the trial?
Holberry was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor.
Oh, wow.
At North Allerton House of Correction.
Okay.
Now, conditions in prisons back then were notoriously brutal.
Yeah, we can imagine.
Overcrowding, poor sanitation, barely enough food to survive.
Right.
But Holberry's case was even worse.
Oh, no.
He was illegally forced to work on the treadwheel.
Oh, wow.
Which was this grueling punishment typically reserved for the most serious offenses.
It's hard to fathom that kind of hardship.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder of how far we've come in terms of prisoner rights.
Absolutely.
And the conditions in our prisons today.
Indeed. And sadly, those harsh conditions took their toll on Holberry.
Yeah.
He developed consumption, which we know now as tuberculosis, while he was imprisoned.
Oh, gosh.
His health deteriorated rapidly. He was later transferred to York Castle.
Oh.
But it was too late.
Oh, no.
In 1842, at the young age of 28, Samuel Holberry died.
Oh, that's so sad. What a tragic end to a life dedicated to fighting for justice and equality.
But even in death, Holberry's impact continued to resonate.
Okay.
His funeral in Sheffield was attended by an estimated 50,000 people.
Wow, 50,000.
That's incredible.
That's a huge number.
An incredible outpouring of grief and solidarity, showing just how deeply he'd touched the lives of the working class.
It's a testament to his courage and the power of the ideas that he fought for.
Absolutely.
So let's delve a little deeper into those ideas. Can you unpack the significance of the People's Charter? Why were those demands so revolutionary for that time?
Well, the People's Charter represented a fundamental challenge to the power structure of 19th century Britain.
Okay.
Let's start with universal male suffrage.
Okay.
Back then, voting rights were limited to property owners.
Right.
Which meant a large segment of the working class had no say in how their country was run.
Right.
The Chartists saw this as just a blatant injustice.
Yeah.
Their demand for universal male suffrage was a call for a truly representative democracy, where every man, regardless of his wealth or social standing, had an equal voice.
It's a concept we take for granted today.
Right.
But back then, that was truly revolutionary.
Absolutely. And the demand for a secret ballot was equally significant.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the pressure people must have felt to vote a certain way if their employers or landlords knew how they voted?
Yeah, that would have been incredibly intimidating.
Yeah.
Especially for those who were struggling to make ends meet.
Right.
They might have felt forced to vote against their own interests for fear of losing their jobs or homes.
Exactly. The secret ballot was seen as crucial for ensuring that elections were free and fair, allowing people to vote according to their conscience without fear of reprisal.
Right.
And then there's the demand for annual parliamentary elections. The Chartists believed that holding elections every year would make the government more accountable to the people.
It's fascinating how those ideas, considered radical in Holberry's time, are now cornerstones of modern democracy in many parts of the world.
Yeah.
It really highlights the lasting impact of the Chartist movement, even though they weren't immediately successful in achieving all of their goals.
Yeah, their struggle really laid the groundwork for many of the democratic reforms we enjoy today.
Right.
They forced those in power to confront the inequalities of the existing system and planted the seeds for change.
So how did the government react to these demands?
Well,
were they open to dialogue at all?
Not exactly. The government saw the Chartists as a threat to the established order.
Right.
Their response was a mix of repression and dismissal. The Newport Rising was a prime example of their willingness to use force to crush dissent. And even though the Chartists largely advocated for peaceful protest, they were often met with hostility and suspicion.
Given the radical nature of their demands,
Right.
it's not surprising that the government reacted with such force.
Yeah.
It seems like a classic case of those in power trying to maintain the status quo.
Precisely. But despite facing constant obstacles, the Chartists persevered.
Yeah.
They continued to organize, to petition, to make their voices heard. They understood that lasting change rarely comes easily.
Right.
It requires a sustained effort, a willingness to stand up for what's right, even in the face of adversity.
And it's important to note that while they didn't see the People's Charter fully enacted in their lifetimes, many of its demands were eventually adopted. It's a powerful reminder that even if you don't see immediate results, your efforts can plant the seeds for future progress.
Absolutely. The Chartists' fight for universal male suffrage eventually led to its realization in 1918. And women gained the right to vote in 1928.
Okay.
The secret ballot became standard practice, and parliamentary elections became more frequent.
Right.
Their vision, though, seemingly radical at the time, gradually became the reality we live in today.
It makes you wonder, what would Samuel Holberry think?
Yeah.
If he could see how far we've come in terms of democratic reform?
It's an intriguing thought. While he might be surprised by the pace of change, I believe he would be heartened to see that the fight for justice and equality continues, even in our own time.
That's a perfect segue to my next question. What can we learn from the Chartists from Samuel Holberry and apply to our own lives?
Right.
What makes their story relevant today?
Well, there are several key takeaways from Holberry's story that resonate really deeply in our modern world.
I'm ready to hear those takeaways.
Okay, so first and foremost, I think it reminds us that the fight for justice and equality, it's never truly over.
Right.
You know, we may have come a long way since the 19th century,
Yeah.
but there are still countless people around the world who are denied basic rights and freedoms.
Yeah,
You know, think about the ongoing struggles for voting rights, for fair labor practices, for equal access to healthcare and education.
Right.
These are all echoes of the battles fought by the Chartists.
Yeah, it's easy to take our own freedoms for granted and forget that those rights were hard won. by people who came before us, people like Samuel Holberry, who were willing to risk everything for a better future.
Precisely, and that leads to the second takeaway, the importance of courage and conviction.
Okay.
Holberry was willing to stand up for what he believed in, even when faced with overwhelming opposition.
Yeah.
He didn't back down. He didn't compromise his principles.
Right.
His story reminds us that we all have a responsibility to speak out against injustice, to use our voices to advocate for change, even when it feels like we're up against a brick wall.
Yeah, I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of some of these problems.
Right.
And think like, what difference can one person really make? But Holberry's story shows that even small acts of defiance, of speaking truth to power, can have a ripple effect.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the third takeaway, the power of collective action.
Yeah.
The Chartist movement wasn't about one person.
Right.
It was about thousands of ordinary people coming together to demand a better world.
Yeah.
They organized, they mobilized, they made their voices heard through petitions, protests, and even armed uprisings.
Wow.
You know, their story is a testament to the idea that when people unite around a common cause, they can create a force powerful enough to challenge the status quo and bring about meaningful change.
So we've talked about these big ideas, justice, equality, courage, collective action.
Right.
How do we translate those ideas into concrete actions in our own lives? What can we do to honor Holberry's legacy and continue the fight for a more just and equitable world?
Well, it starts with awareness, educating ourselves about the injustices that exist in our communities and around the world.
Okay.
It means listening to the voices of those who are marginalized and oppressed. It means staying informed and engaged with the issues that matter to us.
So knowledge is power.
Yeah.
The more we know, the better equipped we are to make a difference.
Exactly. And once we have that knowledge, we can start taking action.
Right.
That might mean volunteering our time to organizations that are working to address these issues, donating to causes we believe in, or contacting our elected officials to advocate for policies that promote justice and equality.
It can also be as simple as having conversations with our friends and family about these issues, raising awareness and challenging those around us to think critically about the world we live in.
Precisely, every action, no matter how small, can contribute to positive change.
Right.
And when we act collectively with shared purpose and determination, we can create a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
So even though Samuel Holberry's story took place centuries ago, it's still incredibly relevant to our lives today.
Absolutely.
It's a story that reminds us that the fight for a better world is a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
It requires courage, conviction, and a willingness to work together to overcome the obstacles in our path.
And above all, it's a story that reminds us that even in the face of adversity, even when the odds seem insurmountable, hope is never lost. The torch of progress is passed from generation to generation.
Right.
And it's our responsibility to carry it forward.
Yeah.
To keep striving for a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a life of dignity, equality, and freedom.
That is a powerful message to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today for this deep dive into the life and legacy of Samuel Holberry.
It was my pleasure.
I hope you'll join us again next time as we explore another fascinating story from history and uncover the lessons that it holds for us today.